last week we saw like further, actually the return of the escalatory ladder being scaled in this global conflict, I'd say, or international trade conflict spills over in international finance between the regional powers, and key among them is US and China. Catalyzing event here was the agreement between the US Treasury and the Argentine government to do a currency swap bailout. What that means in the broader scheme of world trade, and like the 500-year narrative that we're riding on, um, in terms of, let's say, globalization, trade between these regional powers, settlement of the new world, the Western Hemisphere, North and South America. All of this is in play. But right now, we're like what we've seen starting last Thursday, that Argentine US deal, that kickstarted a series of events. And you see these two governments, the uh, CCP under Xi Jinping and the US administration, spearheaded by Donald Trump, but really you see the implementation falling on other parties, like Scott Bessent, heavily involved as the key player on the financial side in these developments as they shake out. But in response to that Argentine US deal, immediate reaction, like within the hours, was China's retaliation to enforce export controls on rare earth elements critical to global industry, international trade, supply, anything, 21st century technology related, you got to have these rare earths. That was a step of escalation. What do you see as the next step from there? Trump's response, this is where the headline comes up. Trump threatens to cut off cooking oil trade with China. You're like, cooking oil? What's that? A knife to a gunfight? This is actually an escalation, even more so above rare earths, in my opinion. So rare earths, you could say with that one, your whole like China is its escalation was to threaten global supply chains, hold modern industry hostage essentially. What Trump's doing here, taking the fight to cooking oil, now you're going into the food supply, right? And so rare earth elements, definitely defense critical, food scarcity.
A little bit more
That is
based
a
on the Maslow hierarchy
serious,
of needs.
yes, exactly. And so if you look at what is the CCP's Achilles heel, it's always food security. If you think about it, you've got over a billion people to feed. They are not internally sustainable, right? And I'll go into the economics. If they wanted to get the billions of people that they count among their population to basically feed themselves on dry rice, a very subsistence level diet, they could probably do that on their own and be internally self-sufficient. But if you want to give your people actual food that they're not upset about eating, like gruel, um, like give them food, give them spice, give them meat, build up that like this middle class lifestyle that the Chinese population has grown to be accustomed to over the last 30 to 40 years, and the Deng Xiaoping and following era, they have to have the new world countries, North and South America, involved. Now, what do I mean by that? You've got two critical dependencies, right? So internal to China, they can produce rice, or pull it in from their rice producing Southeastern Asian country neighbors to import rice products. That's fine. Other kind of grains, wheat, etc., they can pull those in from the global market. That's fine. What they can't, and also meat. They've got their own meat capacity, roughly. They're only 6.5% import dependent on meat. So nearly 94, over 94, 93% internally self-sufficient on meat. If you just look at meat as an output alone. The thing is, to get meat as a finished good, you have to feed, your livestock something, right? What is that something? It's soybeans, right? So like can't sustain a herd of cattle and or lean hogs on rice, as far as I know. Your typical kind of meal product for the livestock herd, it is dependent on soybeans. That's where you get into this soybeans issue. China is 83.6 dependent on imports as of 2024 for its soybean imports. Without the soybeans, you don't get the meat to feed your population and higher quality, sources of protein. And in terms of level, China needs to import 105 million tons of soybeans to keep this food supply humming along. What's the next most critical import? Edible oils. These are your cooking oils. They're nearly 70% import dependent. So not just to get the food, get the meat onto the grocery store shelves, you also need to be able to prepare it and kind of a complementary good and a critical complement to that meat production or your food supply uh, is cooking oils, right? You can't prepare them and finish, meals. So unless you want to feed your population on gruel, these are the Achilles heel of that the CCP is looking over. Any questions there, Cameron, before we go into
I mean, what?
the
Yeah,
nitty gritty?
one that I have here is really just it seems to me like cooking oil is something that you could find other places potentially, right? So to source from. So what specifically about what's going on with, or I guess how does this tie to Argentina specifically?
Yeah, I'll get into that. So actually, to import cooking oils, like it's got to be an edible oil, has to be plant sourced. You're looking at olive oil, vegetable oils, derivatives of soybean, corn, whatever. So it comes down to the agricultural commodities. China, it's, the land that it occupies, it's not good farmland. Um, if you look at the amount of, we'll get into the soybean exports here next slide, or soybean production and import export tables. They don't have the massive amounts and abundance of arable land that exist in North and South America in particular, and their own land that they have, just because of climate, all these other factors, it's less productive than the farmland in terms of output per acre than what you find in North America and South America. And so you add those up, it means your cost of production. International trade is all dependent on marginal costs. What you're supposed to do in the kind of the Ricardian framework, how you build the wealth of nations, you produce what you have the advantage at in terms of a cost structure, and you export that to the rest of the world, right? And from China's perspective, it does not have a cost advantage in food, and it has over a billion people to support. And the key eras of international trade where China is able to export into the international marketplace for its goods is primarily what it delivers. They're very proficient as a culture at delivering manufactured goods. I went to Hong Kong in August and went through the art museum, and you just see it in the culture. Like it's all factories. Like they're very proud of. You'll see silverware produced in the 1800s, just insanely detailed silversmithing. So from export products, porcelain, silk, silver, etc. Like they're just a very um, highly proficient manufacturing culture. That's what they deliver. But then when they're able to export those into external markets with demand, those windows tend to correlate with um, them being able to acquire foods, among other things that they need internally. And that food availability leads to a surge in population growth. So right now, where we are in, Chinese history, obviously we're riding on 40 years of export growth. That's led to economic growth in China on a 40-year secular boom. Um, they've been able to import the foodstuffs they need to kind of feed and supply this population that's, itself gone through a boom over the last 100 years, ever since the kind of the famine of the Great Leap Forward. I think it was like 1959, 1960, 1961, if I have my years right. Worst famine of the 20th century in terms of number and just deaths, like the percentage of a population um, that was impacted. But after that, you saw that a population boom. If you don't have the food supplies, and this has been something that's existed throughout Chinese history. They've been through these cycles before. If you can't feed this population and sustain it, then you run into problems, right? And so this is where the dependency on soybeans and oils and all the other uh, imported products that it relies upon. And you can think of the soybeans are the base layer collateral that allows, the finer proteins, the meat, the animals, the livestock, all of that to to become realized, right? If you pull that Jenga block from the bottom of the tower, you're in a serious problem internally with China. So we're at a very uh, high volatility window here. We'll, in conclusion, talk about what's coming up at the APEC conferences in South Korea, October 31st and November 1st. But the stakes are high at this point in the game.
Yep.
Any comments there?
Yeah, and so then, you talked about it. So I get it. Argentina extremely important to the soybean market, but maybe walk me through how is it actually, you what is the breakdown of that soybean market, maybe by metric?
Yep.
There you go. Yeah.
Yep. Here we go.
And why? So where I was getting at with this was, why is it that Argentina is so important when I see this slide, for example, and it looks like Argentina only produces 11%. Couldn't you say, hey, Brazil, we're gonna actually go buy up all your soybeans, send that over here to China?
That's already happening, right? So you've got a clash of regional powers here. Number one and number two, however you want to stack rank them, are now in conflict, and they have been since, I mean, you could say 2014 at the minimum if you just keep rewinding the tape. But what you're seeing here, United States and Argentina, number two and three soybean producers, they just have a ton of arable land. That's the new world. Brazil is in first place. This has come through, 20 years of deforestation, development, and kind of seed development and genetic engineering to increase their own soybean harvest productivities, yield per acre, bushels per acre types of output. First thing to get across. So you've got 80% of the world's soybean production comes from those three countries, Brazil, United States, and Argentina. And so what you just see with the US striking a deal with the Milei government, right? They're now in the same club. Like they're cooperating. So you've got number two and three who roughly now account for the same level of output as number one. Now, if you look on the export side, US does consume a lot of its soybeans. We produce our own food supply, et cetera. So if we produce about 118,000 million tons per year, we export about 47.5 million tons of that. So in terms of share, yeah, less than half. So we're able to ship those exports. Those go on to the global market, and that's for other countries to feed their own populations. Argentina doesn't actually export hardly anything in terms of soybeans. They're internally consuming all of that. Mainly what they would do is, hey, feed the livestock, and then you export a higher value good onto the open market in meat products. So Argentinian beef, kind of viewed as very high quality global. That's how they actually implement this economically. You see Brazil exports a lot of soybeans. They account for 60% of global exports. So what you can think about this is the secondary market where countries can go to buy the commodity. Brazil is over half. They are the marginal producer. They're the Saudi Arabia of soybeans, right? Now you look at China, what they're doing. So China consumes 133 million tons annually of consumption. They're 31% of annual consumption of soybean production, which I benchmark that to the global population. It could be roughly indexed to population share, right?
Sure.
Billion and a half people, somewhere like that, 8 billion people in the world. Maybe they're slightly punching above their weight, but they're proxying about that. They'll punch above their weight in terms of just share of global headcount, or a more wealthy economy at this point. But China, of that 133 million tons a year, they have to import 112 million metric tons. And CFR, remember that slide before? They said 105 million. This is the USDA's estimate for 2025, 2026. So that's where they see it. So roughly same or similar ballparks. But basically, what this shows you, China's food stocks, like they're entirely dependent on Brazilian soybean exports. So now you see number two and number three, US and Argentina, they're moving towards cooperation, right? We can go through the long form of Argentina and its political developments over the last 300 or 400 years. We don't have time for that today. But the TLDR version of that is with Malay, you're seeing the internal governance faction that wants to align more with the United States and the Anglo-Dutch. You can think of it as like the Commonwealth countries framework world. That's the direction Argentina is moving. This is a process that's been underway ever since the Spanish colonized Buenos Aires in Argentina, like 1500s, 1600s, and it's been slowly migrating towards the Anglo-Dutch direction. But in my framework, that's really rolling up now to the U.S. now leading that coalition. So what that deal was last Thursday was basically Argentina entering the U.S. sphere of orbit